Anzukasin Nimada, Che Kanachi, Naya, Di Tiendo, and more, more to let him pass it, and a Kuzu Tempa said, and then Tempa Nini or S, Tempa Ni or S, that the needs are done to him. That the chicken needs near look, more near, but the Che Kanachi, no Kunzu Tempa Chitang or Donaba. Donaba Tempas, Ni Tempa Ni Yoba, some of the Donne, the more the Yakanasi, we need to do how go at the kitchen bores. The names other on the cousin Tigor, the Tempani, the Tempani, Nanetta, Muyong, Donna Tempa Sati, Takanashi, and you did Susan Nine, the Rang, Kalaya, Matupa, Lufa, Shabala, Tuba, Matupa, Rang on your trip, Tombadi, that could you think the Donna Tempatis. And Madame Majibetsna, Lupa, Shaba, Zamji, Yobadi, and Chicken did and Kundu Tempatis, as kissing the Korean, she said. Lupa Shaz, Topeta, Madame Majibetsna, Lupa, Shaba, Zamji, Yobadi.
Good morning. And last time we concluded looking at the presentation on the two truths. And the two truths is a very useful technique to come to understand how all phenomena exist, because the very essence of how phenomena exist can be very clearly understood and easily understood through the presentation of the two truths. The ultimate truth is the natural way that phenomena abide. And that is that phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own essence, or they're empty of existing by way of their own nature or characteristics. Or another way to express it is phenomena are empty of being independent. Rather, the way they do exist is the conventional truth then, and that is as mere imputations by mind, or only as an imputation by mind. So last time we concluded looking at the presentation of the two truths, conventional and ultimate truth.
Rangone, Kalaya, Maduba, Rangon, Nengores, Chesanganazi, Nawanashi, or Danish two, Sempiki Zimbati, Matu Tenzin Maripa, Sashi, Tangazu Yomoba Tamje, Yoek, Zavi, Cutie, and Dires, Dene, Zadangazuki, Di Pa, Jebache, Di Tocho, Zimanashi, to him into Jebache, Di Zimanashi, Majuba Toya, Di Tobaina, Tangazu, Donate Basset, two wars, Chesati.
All phenomena, every single phenomenon without exception, is empty of existing by way of its own nature. It's empty of being established by way of its own essence. However, all phenomena appear to us as if they are established by way of their own essence. So phenomena appear to us in a way completely the opposite to how they actually abide, how they actually exist. And not only do phenomena appear to us as existing by way of their own essence, our consciousness grasps at the phenomena as existing in the way that they appear. And this consciousness, because it's contrary to reality, it's apprehending phenomena in a way that is contrary to how they exist, it is an ignorance. And it's grasping at phenomena as existing in the way they appear. It's grasping at them as existing truly. And therefore it's called ignorance of true grasping. And this is the root cause from which all our other afflictions and all our suffering arises. So here, coming to understand that, we need to investigate then how phenomena appear to us, how we grasp at them, and whether they exist in the way they appear. And we realize they are empty of existing in the way they appear. They're empty of true existence. And this way we come to realize the ultimate truth.
Jidar Nawa Tar Drub de Yena, Yusu Jidar in Shitu Tabana, Rangyongo, Jesse do Drogobashi is.
Turning to the text in the middle of page 10, with starting at the new outline, searching for the self. So I've just changed the translation a little bit in the first sentence. When a phenomenon appears to be truly existent, if the phenomenon existed in the same way as it appeared, when the way it exists is carefully analyzed, then its essence would necessarily become clearer.
There Demba Nawa, Dice, Jizan Nawa, the Drub de Yena, so Jazangas, Demba Now, do Lulia, Yudi Nang, the Kanisnangors, Kala Matu, Rangun, the Trubash Nangore, Dinan to the Demba Drubana Suriese. Just not the nigger now on Ashinchi, Yobayina, Sinan, Yobayina, or Dangazuki.
When a phenomenon appears to be truly existent, if the phenomenon existed in the same way as it appeared. So this is how all phenomena appear to us, as if they are established by the way of their own nature or their own essence. In other words, they appear to us as if they have some actual essence to their phenomenon which defines them. So that's this sentence starts with two ways of expressing the same meaning, which equates to true existence, phenomena existing by way of their own nature or essence.
Jidar yin ye canis do se chip pa jebache yoba nashin do mindu jebache de gabla so yuzu jidai ship do tapana se de tini shimju chin pa kimsan samta jebache tini jebache de gabla ana ngone yoba yin garuosna rangu ngo jeso do jogo ba shi yin rangu ngo di 당원에 요반에 거의 통고고 세부 그 심주 제제도 서서서 세부시부 통고고 그래서 이내 통고 말에 세상 그 심주 제도 매바 자르고 그래제.
Reading it again. When a phenomenon appears to be truly existent, if the phenomenon existed in the same way as it appeared, so there the meaning is the same between those two clauses, just being expressed differently. And the sentence continues, when the way it exists is carefully analyzed, then its essence would necessarily become clearer. So I've just changed the translation a little there. The meaning of this sentence is, if phenomena existed in the way that they appeared, by way of their own nature, their own defining characteristics or their own essence, then when that defining characteristic or that essence or that nature is sought, that essence or nature should become ever more apparent as one searches or looks for it. It should become, as the text says, ever clearer.
And the Tenako Patawasha du Kabla, and Davigi many chunal matadu, Dao watch Tungor, wada, not Milia many chunala Dao Yovash Tunangore. Jesa Milia many chunala Dawako Yobakabu Hoshiba, Nawana Shinchi, Nawana Shin do many chunalma Zuisha, Tavaina, the Yomarwa. When Yovaina many Zuisha, Tadu, Tungor, Wadi Tungor, and Tungor, the Tungio Marwas. On Bedina Shinchiba, Hanzula, now you do Kalama, the Rango do Nangore, now I Nashin can do the Jebachi, then again now at the Docho, Kaya Madu, Timeba, and you Tongo Regile. Kala do now I didn't never have Regile. Yena, that Tongo or Jebachi, which is a Meba Hagora, Pene Chunalma, David, now you do money you made the Jebachi, they see now and as you do him in Jebachi, many Jebachi made you that. Dina the Mindu said how war. Dina she now and I shin Jeba Chedu, and Meba the Hago, Mindu said now and I see Mindu said how.
For example, if we see a moon reflecting in a lake, and we wonder to ourselves, I wonder if there really is a moon in the lake, and we investigate, of course, we'll find that there is no moon in the lake at all. And we would, when we're seeking the moon, have confidence that if the moon exists in the lake, we would actually find it there. But when we search, when we search and we do not find it, then we know with certainty the moon does not exist in the lake. So this is the purpose of analysis. We come to see how something appears, and then we search to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. And in the case of the reflected moon, we would realize that there is no actual moon to be found within the water, within the lake. Then returning to the text, for example, even in terms of what is widely known in the world, if something is true, it becomes clearer and its foundation firmer the more one analyzes it. Therefore, when sought, it must definitely be findable.
di ngui su di imba de ha ko tu go ba china ji de yong da la yan den ba xi imba yin na jo ben mi ji gi na mi ji gi pini da xin na na lo ya ane lang bo che yo re se chi pa ji xie ba yin na ko ji xie ba di ngui ne ran den ba chin ba yin na xie ba na xin lang bo che xin na na lang bo che yo ba yin na oda mi ji gi xin na di na lang bo che yo re se du然后大ga zhuo这个如果是嘛怕mi ji gi怕这个xin na de这样的ngui ne yo ba yin na但是呢当波马通高了，让不去做一个更被接入的，现在让不去一，俺这个当时做过着同样的，今嘛我到底有啥的是怕把这些的，今让不去我呢同样用过了吧？但是我呢会让不去有了些吧，那些短大了让不去用不越不一呢，怕这些大队可能让不去也越去了，但。第那个会写把拿心，就怕这就可能我就要了写把拿心，我都要把拿心写把拿心，就或怎么心就怕这个的，现在的拿了来让不起的页面呢，但没得这些的专业下是，没本人下是几个话，当然就得用到了。现在让不起页面呢，没些这些的可点把来写，我呢让不起读，所以呢你也送下去写就了吧。现在第拿心的。可以写把拿心这些页面呢，我对这些的专业些拿出来下下去，那就去用它来的用过了起来。
In brief, the meaning of this of what I've just read is that if something is true, one could seek it out and would find it. So, for example, if someone were to say to me, "There's a bull roaming in the forest," and I think, oh, I wonder if this is correct. And I went searching for the bull. I would know that if the bull is roaming in the forest, there should be evidence of it. There should be signs. For example, I would look for its footprints. I would look for excrement. And if after searching the forest thoroughly, I saw no hoof prints, no excrement, then I would know I've searched well. There are no signs of it anywhere. Then my friend my friend deceived me or he was joking with me, because I've looked and there was no bull to be found.
Dele dode za nye meba ina ma nye ba ni de she ba de dele de zumba shi ina den de je ne za wa na mi se lo zhuo xin tar cu mi tu ba shi zhuo wa de yin se de ko ji xi de xie ba na xin zun yin ba ina zun xie ba ina xie ba na pa jie ba qi de ga le pa ane me ba de ha me ba de se ha wo xin na za wo yin min du san be ge tong yong lu wa ji ji san de ne yin za ane ko xie ba duan la mi tie ba de tong yong gu le xie
And the paragraph concludes, if on the contrary it is false, then when it is analyzed and sought, it becomes less clear, and in the end, it cannot stand up to such analysis. So here the meaning is clear, and it follows the same principle as was presented before. If something exists and it's sought, it should become clearer. If on the contrary, something doesn't exist, this will become clear when one analyzes, seeks it. Its non-existence will become ever clearer.
Nandala Garasungorasine, Jeza, Denigi, Langbochi, Shina, Dina, Langbochi, Yore, Sibi, Kishi, Ti, Sheba Nashin, Dondala, Yoba, Ina, Pa, Zijitan, Nyunguri, Dinyeba Ina, Kui Sheba Nashin, Dembache, Kishi, Dembachagores, Jeza, Denigi, Sheba Nashin, Pa, Zin, Nye, Meba Ina, Dinku Kishi, Zunju, no two chatter, Zun chatter was, Jeza, Jidina, Latine, Yorwa, on Dinashin. 당한서 봐 낭유도 갈 배능아서 풍보지를 빼샤바이나 마한서 풍보디 마한서라 낭유도 가는 상을서네 강라에 마도버 뢰파 샤발라 마도 랑응원이 두바 능고레스 디 나와디다 랑보치리 요래 셰셰바데 직바데 디 나와나 신지 가니스 두스 바 심주지 제바 제도 콜 나와나 신 된라시 여바이나 풍보디 강라에 마도 랑응원이 두바 예데바이나 파 심주지 제바 제도 갑라 기 통고고레스 니고고레스 제가 두 제바 제도 감나 균이 매바지 되니 많이 봐지 디 동위 동상지마다 니금도 와서 제가 동상 차로도 와 동상 차로도 대신 나와나 신주 돌라 매바레스 민도 와서 매바지 나와디다 나와나 신 돌라 매바인자 나와다 요래서 진바데 로로셰리에서 그러다디
The meaning of the illustration that's been given thus far is that if we are told that, or we have a suspicion that there is a bull roaming in our surrounding forest, we can be sure that we can gain certainty through seeking it. And if we seek the bull and it exists, there is a bull roaming in the forest, through seeking it, finding evidence, and then eventually seeing the bull directly, it will become, its presence, its existence in the forest will be abundantly clear. Similarly, we can be confident that if we search thoroughly and we find no evidence at all for the bull being there, its non-existence in the forest will become abundantly clear. And this relates to our aggregates. So our aggregates appear to us as if they are established by way of their own essence. They exist by way of their own defining characteristic or their own nature. This is how they appear to us. So this then we can liken in the illustration to hearing there is an elephant in the there is a bull in the surrounding forest. So here, just like we knew to seek out that bull to know for certain whether it was there or not, likewise, to find out, to come to know with certainty whether our aggregates exist in the way they appear, we seek out their essence. We seek out this defining characteristic or nature that they appear to exist by. And we knowing that, just like with seeking the bull, if our aggregates, our physical mental aggregates, do exist by way of their own essence, that essence should be found. Just like the bull. We should find it if the bull is in the forest. Likewise, if the aggregates do not exist by way of their own essence, that too should become clear if we seek well and don't even find a sign or any clues of the aggregates existing by way of their own essence. Just like when we were seeking the bull, we found no excrement, we found no hoof prints, and we didn't see the bull. Then we could be confident that our friend who told us that there was a bull was wrong. Just like then, once we've sought out the defining characteristic or the nature by which our aggregates appear to exist by, and we come to see that they do not exist by way of their own nature, we'll recognize that it's a wrong consciousness that grasps at them as existing in the way that they appear.
Tarin ne tongwe suk nyewa namje sawa tong mikyu kalte chuyin na nyewa namje jimi tong jide rinwa namje ne jidin dini yangda tongs ane dedar dedan nye namje midong tsamma mikyu shins ando sumare.
Now that's 2 verses from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. A form that is viewed from afar is seen clearly by those nearby. If a mirage were actually water, why would those nearby not see it? Just as by those from afar, this world is seen as real, it is not so seen by those nearby, for whom it is as signless, like a mirage.
다요도 사지지리아 아주 숙지 미로버지 숙지 미 숙로버지 통고여봐나 나 다디네게 아주레 미페니 미지랑 되샤 선배 삼로지 고그로와 데네 통고로와 다 와시 통고 제가 데네게 타르니네 통요 숙세 디시고래 빼로지 데네 타르니네 통요 숙세고래 제가 다른 번에 파 따지 사지 다른 번들이 편이 미지랑 되바나지 미숙지 통바이나 통고여바나 이 다른 애는 통요 숙세 너나들래 버려제 다른 분들이 편이 숙지 통하죠 봐 다른 애는 통요 숙세야 돼 직직라기도 하대 다른 애는 통요 숙세 다른 분 봐다 사지질을 따지 걸로 편이 미지랑 되바로지 숙지 미로지 능고로 와 데네 미숙으로 능고로 와 데네게 통요 왕시 주도 와서 지난 다른 애는 통요 숙진 다른 분의 통요 왕시기 되세요 숙미 미숙 통요 왕시 되세요.
The first line, a form that is viewed from afar. So, for example, if with our eye sense consciousness, in the distance, we see a form, and we think, oh, that looks like a person that's standing up.
데니게 다른 번에 데니게 쑥 통도 경기 미기 셰바디 페니게 쑥디레 통 맞추와치 아니 콜미레 쑥디 나와 나신지 여바 있나 아니 여래 요 말에스 미디 추셰레베스네 코 통화 나신 쑥디 페니 매바 있나 미디 추셰 자르고 와 통화 나신 페니 쑥디 여바 있나 뭐네 여바 있나 미디 안 추셰 많이 벌로 된된 자르고 와 제사다 다 미디를 쑥 타는 것도 페니 쑥디 난거래 미디다 나와 나신 쑥디 여래 요 말에 세정아 제지적으로 와다.
Seeing what appears to be a person in the distance, if the sense consciousness that is perceiving what appears to be a person is correct, then that consciousness will be factually concordant. However, if that shape is not of a person, despite that's what one is thinking, then one's consciousness will be mistaken. So the consciousness could be mistaken or unmistaken. And how does one know? One needs to investigate.
당한서 진바 편이 통하나지 편이 미지 두었으네. 되는 간서 파 좋아지 미디 편이 미지 투어 줘고로 파줘 다 녀녀녀 제도 내는 미디 쇠쇠쇠 통으로 제산 잠들래도 미디 뭐에 대시 통하나지 미디 여바 있나? 다 잠들래도 미디 통으로 제산 녀와 남게 싸와 통서 안파 줘제 편이 미디 두었으네. 다디마제 파 타녀녀녀도 파 줘줘 녀와도 두신 다 잠들래도 다 녀와 잠들래도 다 대시 통하나 여바 있는 된다 여바 있나? 미디 세고 통거래 해제래 통용 통도 하제.
Seeing what appears to be a person in the distance, but wanting to be sure, wanting to see whether one's consciousness is mistaken or unmistaken and therefore factually concordant, one investigates. How so? Walks towards the person. And as one comes ever closer, if that shape that one has seen that appears to be a person is a person, as one nears the person, that shape is that of a person will become ever clearer.
안디나시 랑안주기 대디 최진디 다른 번에 미션나 미사와지기 녀마디 최대 유마 하모와지 미 다른 번에 다이드변에 되니 최대인데 미기 통구여변에 얘니직 통 최대인로 통구도 선데 안곧야 야야야 잠데는 아직 레제 대잠들레도 되니 세우슈 통고로 와 제가 거의 통화 밀레 나와 나신 최대인데 여바인자 델리아 수수 곧 수타냐르레도 타 잠데레도 네 세우슈 통고로 통도 와서 제가디 통화 나신 밀레 나와 나신 된들 여바이나 안 주주신 타니불레도 미기 오송원내라 통화여로 와서 세부 통투구도 와서
Perhaps this is experience that many of you have had when you came here initially for the first time, and you're approaching the property, and in the distance you could see above the tree line the golden spire of the stupa glistening in the sun, and you wonder to yourself, I wonder if that is the great stupa that I've heard so much about, but one's not entirely sure. How does one become entirely sure? By coming closer. And coming closer, then one sees the stupa in all its magnificence and all its entire form, and then one knows with certainty that one's consciousness is unmistaken, is factually concordant, and that it is the stupa. And that is because as one came clearer, it became ever clearer.
지상 여바 된了여바 인자或者잠들 레시这个잠들 레도 세부 좀 통도 하세 다디 배직해 셔서
Here this is talking about establishing whether something exists or not, and one establishes whether something exists or not through investigating. So in these illustrations, something that appears in the distance, one just needs to go closer to it, and then we'll know if it exists as what we believed it to or not.
나는 나 미규 걸대 취나 녀와남게 지미 통했어요. 다 미규세에 대한 저기 니마 차와다도 편이 제탕으로 제번에 제탕들이야 니마 차와 바다도 다른 분에 다도 다 미니기 니메에 대한 제탕기들 랑반이도 지도 다 미리야 취나신 난 거로 될 미규세 거래. 지상 데니나 추페인 제타지나려야 추나신징아 미리 난거래 더 나와나신 편이 추치도 삼제 만 삼다제 다데니 갈디 미규 추이나 데니게 나와나지 미규 추나 나와나신지 되려야 원내라 추인바이나 다 편이 추 데니게 나도 편이 추로 예사의 패스 추로 통구도 센제 가파가도 제가 제제 파잠들레도 녀와 남게 지미 통어세데 충원에 있나 안 주의마 통구거래. 제가 될래야래도 추 통구민도와 주민도와 세월. 제가 매바인자 되네게 따디걸 미규들에 주의마 나디게 론 미이 셰바도 추르에 선배 진바도 록셰 차도요. 해제래.
Take another illustration. Let's say we see a lake of water or a surface of water in the distance, and then we think there's water, because that's what we're perceiving, but as we come closer to it, it disappears, and we know that that was just a mirage. And this then is presented in the next two lines. If a mirage were actually water, why would those nearby not see it? So here, we see a shape in the distance, we approach, and instead of it becoming clearer, like if it was the person or the stupa, now it disappears. So here we come to recognize that was a wrong consciousness. That what appeared to us as water was not. It was just a mirage.
녀와 남기 지미 통세를 되네게 잠들레도 충원에 있나 통구월도 있나 통구민도 와서 제가 통구민도 대자 면자 다 대신 미규 출나와디 나와나신 진비 원시의 록셰의 미규도 추마인바질 출나와디 나디오레스 제가 록셰레스 제가디 록셰레스 대신예레셰 경한조 숙드바 나와나신 도도시는 아주 변에 최진의 수미래 나와나 다른 보다 통화도 그래 되네 최진 나와도 안 된 마수 추잠들레도 데 원내라 세부 통도 와서 네가선 당보디 미기 셰발로 최진 나와나신 된다라 최진 여여레 지상 코 마추와자 거의 나와나신 된라 여반자 델바수 제시 다지 잠들레도 세부 통용 거래서 다데 미규 추나디 나와나신 된라 매바레스 매바디 인자 땅안죽파 추지도스파 도 제가 저디 잠들레도 통해 매바 차기도 와 제자디 록셰레스로
And if we combine these two together, let's say we look in the distance and we see a person on the side of a lake. Then we wonder, there's a person next to a lake, and we come closer and we see there is a person, but there is no lake. So here we recognize that there was a person, but the lake was a mirage. The person, therefore, exists in a way that it appears, the lake does not. And how did we establish whether those two objects exist in the way that they appear or not? Is by investigating. This investigation is not very complex. We just move closer, and the shape we thought was that of a person turned out to be that of a person, and therefore that consciousness was a factually concordant consciousness, whereas the other, where what appeared to be a lake turned out to be a mirage, that consciousness was a wrong consciousness, and we came to this correct conclusion through investigation. And the second verse, just as by those from afar, this world is seen as real. Now this verse presents the meaning of the preceding verse. Just as by those from afar. So here, again, this verse is now presenting the meaning of the illustrations in the preceding verse. So those from afar refer to those who have not realized emptiness, who are far from understanding reality. How do phenomena appear to them? So phenomena appear to them. How phenomena appear to those who have not realized emptiness yet is the meaning of this first line. The person then who has not realized emptiness, who are still far from realizing emptiness, for them, the person on the side of the lake and the lake both appear to them. And such a person will believe that there is a person there and there is a lake. Both will appear to them as existing by way of their own essence, and the person will apprehend both as existing in the way that they appear. This person still needs to investigate, to come to recognize whether either or both of these objects exist in the way that they appear or not. This investigation still needs to happen for those who are still far from realizing emptiness. They need to investigate whether the person exists in the way that it appears, the lake exists in the way that they appear. And through correct analysis, they will be able to see whether their consciousness is in accordance with reality or not. So then if we turn this to the view of the ultimate, then phenomena appear as if they exist by way of their own essence or their own nature. If they do, then when one investigates that nature, for example, the nature of the object will become clear. If they do not, what becomes clear is that there is no nature by which the object exists. And in this way, one can identify whether the previous apprehending consciousness was a wrong consciousness or factually concordant.
Jidin dine yada tongsne jidin le debi papa nam pabe gansa namgi ane jigi topa la ganlai ma rangmun ne duba nawa na shinji zawa gyune meba tongsan de tongpa yide onsum tonggu tuwas onsum tongwa tonggo re che da de nyere di ma che jidin dine yada tongse de jidin le debi papa so jidin papa pabe gansa namgi jidin dine yada tong sekse de Jide rinwa namgi nin se de donda xie sar san de ji. Ta ni ba de jidin din de ya da tong se xie gu wa. De ji gar se ne jide ni se de pa ba jidin le de be pa kwa la go re je. Jidin se de jidin be ga sa le de be pa be ga sa se gu re. De so namgi de so gar se ne rang xin yu be dong ba ni de wo sum de tong go re se ya da tong se de se gu re.
So the translation then, or the second line, I'll change later. How I've translated here is incorrect. So it should be something more along the lines of the correct way that the world is seen. So something like that. The correct way, the correct way that the world is seen. This then refers to how Arya beings, those who have realized emptiness, actually see the world.
Chizanda Karsosne, Jitin Len Debi, Pabi, Kansa Namgi, Rashin Yutribu, Tomba Yidu, Yanda Thongson, Monsum the Tongo, Monsum the Togo, Larwa, Deshi, Niedile, Jiderua Namgi Nisi, Tongi, Motobi, Kansa, the Lulpa, Yudi, Naidu, Kalama Rangun, the Tuba, Nangore, Nawanajin, the Zingore, said Charwa. That Dondala, Karashigosene, Deshi, Tony Motobi. Jidera said, Deji di Tony Motobe Kansa said it and to get to Sosoki or Mali or Nibadi, Pabe Kansa or Yerwa. Da Garla Warsene, Tony Motobe Kansa, la Yudigan, Nang, do Kalama, the Rang went to Nangore, now Anaji Yore, some Zingor Wakonzugi. The Zimba Nashin, Jeba Che, and goes Jeba Che, when you should only Zimba Nashin, Dala Yobaina. Jebachi the Pabe Gansa to get Tongo water, Pabe Gansaki did run when the Juba the Yoba the Matonga, Gartongos, run when the Juba Tongbigi, Tomba the Tongo, Tomba in Mosum Toro water. So that the Ninza, Jidin Bigi, Tony Motobe Gansa and Namgi, Nawan, the Gang run when the Juba, Nawan, Ashinjik, Dona Yomares, Yoba Ina, Jebachi, Pabe Gansa, and Tongo water was, just that Tongo Mindo was.
These first two lines in the second verse. The first line refers to those who have not realized emptiness, who are far from realizing emptiness. The second line refers to those Arya beings who have realized emptiness, and they see the world as it really is. So we just need to change the order of the words around. It's because the second line refers to the Arya beings who see the world as it really is. So the meaning then of these two lines is that for ordinary beings, ordinary beings, we believe that the world, that phenomena, exist in the way that they appear. If this is the case, those who have, now second line, those who have come to see the world for how it really exists, should see the world in the same way as ordinary beings do, but they do not. For those who have come to see the world how it really exists, the Arya beings, they see the world as being empty of true existence, of not existing in the way that it appears. And that is because they have investigated, they have analyzed, and come to realize that the world is empty of existing in the way that it appears, empty of true existence. The Arya beings have come to realize that the world exists in a way that's contrary to how it appears to ordinary beings and is apprehended by ordinary beings.
잠들에 추 통고할 추 원보 디기 갈 통고할 추 매바 통도 와서 대신 나와들에 독초 매바도 통도 와서 제가 추 매바데 제가 디지 추나의 와셰데 추셰데 추여레스 메진벨로 록셔 자되래 비디나시 다데 돈이 마도 비게 가소소기 볼라 유디게 나에도 갈라이 마도 랑고도 두 능고래 나와나 요레 삼 징구도 와서 제가 디 나와나시 요레스 진 나와나시 요레스 진바이나 대바 디니스 나와데 나지 두에 민두스 제바체체 디는 파베 가사디기 파도 제바치디 딘 갈라마도 랑문도 벤 나와디 통예나 통국어를 건조 통구민도 와 건조기 독쇼 갈 통구스는 딘 매바 통구도 와서 매바 디 동배 동바데 통구도 와서 지산 동배 동바 동산 통바 동바니 통용바자 지대시 소소기비기 원셰라 갈라 율 러려야 갈라마도 랑문도 나와 나시디 다 매바레스 제가 매반자 나와나지 두 심비 짐바디다 로셰레 미규 추진비 와셰다 지바레스 오다 링이 다디 대시기 된다 배치하시마다 지가 사바시메다 대시 다디 대신예마이 배들와 가스네 가지 니들 하고서
We can further understand these two lines by referring to the illustration above, that of a mirage. Because if we see a lake of water in the distance, we know that if we walk towards it, if that is an actual lake of water, it should become ever clearer to us. It would no longer be seeming so flat and shimmering. As we come closer, we'd really gain confidence that that is a lake of water. But through doing our physical investigation, when we come closer, we'll actually see it disappear. It's non-existent. And it evidently is empty of existing in the way that it had appeared. So this is the process that ordinary people such as ourselves need to engage in. Because we apprehend or we grasp at phenomena as existing in the way that they appear. We then need to investigate to see whether they do exist in the way they appear, whether they do exist in the way that we apprehend them, grasp at them as existing. And if we do investigate well, we'll come to the same conclusion that the Aryas do, that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. They are empty of existing in the way that they appear. And the consciousness that grasped at them as existing in the way that they appear is a wrong consciousness.
미규 출나요기 출나제 출나와나신 출두 선배가 와시대 진비 미규 출진비 와시대다 당아주 셈지 돈이마도에 강사라 최대제 라신 주바 낭네 나와나지 두 선배 진바이도 권이 배된제 나 대표니 추두미도 제바치 파타 사지들 파 조지 파 조지 잠데레제 왕보를 규매 캔디기 안델이야 통해도 그 주매바 통과 주매바 주민도 주매바 통에 왕비 셰바 대당 대다 파비 강사기 템버주바 나와나진 또 제바 체제 두미 제바 체냐네 템버주바 동반이 원숨도 별로 니보디 배된 제거래.
So I think this is an illustration that's easy to understand and good to bear in mind. Phenomena appear to us as existing by way of their own nature. And how we as ordinary beings relate to all phenomena is we believe that they exist precisely as they appear to us, without any doubt, with great certainty. And this can be likened to someone seeing a mirage and having utter conviction that there is a lake of water. However, should that person investigate the appearance, they'll come to realize that the lake does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. Similarly, should an ordinary being investigate whether phenomena exist in the way they appear or not, they too, just like an Arya, would come to realize that phenomena are empty of true existence. So therefore, the person who comes to realize that the lake was never existed, but was only never existed in that way, was empty of existing in the way that it appeared, this can be likened to the wisdom realizing emptiness.
다되네 지금 오마들라 대다르 대다 년남기 미동 참매 미규시 세대 나대지 지바래 돈다 지바래 대시바래 대다르 대다 년남기 세대 대시 미규를 춘나 나요도 나의 왕셰들 미규 추요래 선배 진제 판이 추두 선파 대시 추두 섬대로와 대네파 타 추요스다 나 추디 동고 섬제 파파파 타녀는 판이로데 잠딩 예래도 추디 통고 말아 대다르 대다 년남기 미통 세도 타녀는도 아니 미통 그 통고 말 추디 마통와도 주매바 통도 와서 제자 주매바 통와서 미규 춘나요 왕시 추시에 추요래 선배 진비 진바 록셰 차도요래서 대디 배디체 대진예 셰바 지바르 배디체 다 돈다라 아니 미통 다 참매 시도다 참매 시도는 덴버주발 바자시네 지상아 저 돈이 마도비 소소기보 남라 유디 나유도 가르선 강라에 마도 랑문이 주바 능고 덴버주바 능고레스 나와다 요레 심비 진바디다 요 진고로 와스 지산 디네기 진바나 신직다 두 미도 제바 제제 파바 남기 부 제바시네 두 제바 제도 파베 가사 남기 딜레 도초 나와도 좀 동바도 도롱도 와서 동바 도반자 되는 제반 되는 두 가지도 제는 예매와 많이 반자 나와나 신지 매바레스 지난 미규 추인 바디다 지바차 제자데 되는게 나와 셰바도 로셰레스 지난 미규 신스 데 미규다 미규 추진비 왕셰데다 지바레스.
In the final two lines, it is not so seen by those nearby for whom it is signless like a mirage. It is not so seen by those nearby for whom it is signless like a mirage. So here, so let's first look at some of the language. So the term sign, so in another context, we know it as characteristic. And the meaning of sign or characteristic is true existence. Something being signless or having no characteristics is equated to being empty of true existence. So here one sometimes hears the term, phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own characteristics or empty of true existence. So we can understand that as being like a mirage that does not exist, or a pool of water that does not exist as a pool of water, but is rather recognized to be empty of existing the way that it appears because it's a mirage. So then this can be said to be equivalent to being empty of true existence, empty of existing by way of its own defining characteristics, or signless. And how does one come to realize this? So just like the person, as explained a moment ago, who sees the lake of water, through the investigation of walking towards the lake, realizes that lake does not exist in the way that appears, because now it has vanished, and recognizes that it was only a mirage, that person recognizes that that object, the phenomenon, the lake, is empty of existing in the way that it appears, because if it did exist in the way that it appears, it should have been found, but it was not found. And therefore the consciousness that apprehended the lake was clearly a wrong consciousness.
당한 저기 당한 카콤 집에 추동에 카콤 쉬우시 카콤 되바이나 먼저 추동고로 다 추디가 가도무도 때리qabla 미글이야 편이 추지 나와이나 당원에랑 거기 나와나 신추디 여바이나 당한 저 되는 파 저지 거기 나와나 편이 추지도 되는 마 저지 파저디 아니 추디 편이 여러와 여반자 딩한저 동제는 가지고 꼼비 동아디게 세제 아니 세투고로와 지나 되네기가 중에 가끔지 시에기 소래 교투고로와 다 안디 추 나와나 신시 되려 여바이나 다 추기 바 잠데 레제 바 제유도 모소 통 디베셰 땅 마저기 베셰 땅에 가서 디기 줍투야 돼 자투고래제와 그 되네 자디 추 나와 추와 매밤 마추와 그 나와나 신시 되려 여바이나 디기 된다 돼 가서 줍투고래제와
We can imagine if we are parched, we're really thirsty, and we see in the distance with our eye sense consciousness a lake of water. Being thirsty, we'll definitely approach that lake, wanting to drink and relieve our thirst. And we would do so with confidence that if that lake existed, we would find it.
단지는 지금 가끔씩 추지파 제이들간에 미규들 아주 편히 재탕 개침보제 되는 니마샤도 갑려야 아니 되네기 편히 미규들 니메 왜다 아니 되게 많이 랑바니기 때문에 추나시 미규들 되는 추바 나도 편히 추시도 섬지 편히 미규들 추르고 나와를 나지 편히 추도 섬배 삼로시게제 당한 중에 편히 봐 제타는 바바로 추동아 로고로 와다 추파 제가로 담들레도 추메바래 양디는 맞다도 타링스도 그 제타인자 내가 많이 타링 산다지리야 미규도 출는 어편이 두선 바로 그러니까 좀 타링을 봐 제타길과 차와친 뭐지 되네 간섬지리야 추디 말자 카콤제 아니 시루고래지래 제사 시루고래스 되네자 디 가르쳐 버려서네 대시 미규 출나 왕시티 나와나 시지 미 추도 스미 진비 로디 로시 차요 노트 차되래 제가 로 노트지기 제소 장제가 주파 도시 디도나 주비에게 도나로 조바이나 안돌이야 안 타임에 타주 될 양아들 강아채 용거래 제래 도나디시 거래 베디.
However, if let's say we're having this experience in the desert and it's a hot sunny day and we're parched and we see this lake and we approach and then the lake disappears, immediately we will know that our consciousness was wrong. There is no lake. Perhaps though we'd see another in the distance, and now still parched, we'll approach that lake, hoping that this time it really is a lake, and then that disappears, and this will continue. And each time we'd recognize that our eye sense consciousness that had perceived these colors and shapes, and then the mental consciousness that imputed, oh, this must be water, these were wrong consciousnesses. And we'd know this each and every time. But this follows from the process of investigation.
와시 로셰디 제수자주 추디파 제가 조구마로와 추디파 제가 마조 조구마로 디 마조바는 되는 마제상 차와길 바 조로진 소는 영아의 용고 마로와.
Realistically, having approached one or two lakes and realized they were mirages, we then almost certainly have done sufficient analysis to have the knowledge and skill to recognize that to recognize that phenomena do not necessarily exist in the way they appear. And the third mirage we see, we probably would not believe that that were a lake, but recognize that it is a mirage, and therefore wouldn't even bother searching it out, walking towards it, because by now we have done enough analysis to recognize that what appears, that phenomena do not necessarily exist in the way that they appear.
On Bedina, Tangazulia, and the Chignazuna said in our Nanga said, Kala Matuba, Lupa Shalom Matu Rang when the Tubash Nangores. Just that in our Nashi, Yore, some Zimba in the Tinga, my temperature, Rashin to put Zimbares. Then now Nachi Yores and Zinje, Digi Zimbi Tone, Tang Nala, and Ni, Zhao, Ni, said, then Pajik. Chatan ye, Chawata, Chatan ye, Chatan di Wangi, and it's Nai Kone Shanlia, that Chapi Dang Wangi, Nai Kone Shanlia, Sixup Dang, Genju Jia, and Lu Kone Shanla, So Jia, Lots of but Jizan Chatan Wangi, Shan, So Jia, Shanla Ganga Jia, Jizan Nupi Jawa Mongochin, and Divasa, and Di Wangi and the Ganga Tijili, Nyo Jiko Kowal Korje. Dunga Batumeba Yongwedi, Chasan Rashan Niga, La Gamati, Denishli Gores. Chasan Danganzo, Nga, Sengalia, Marashi, but now I see Shimchi, Jeba Cheche, or now I see Yomar Meba, now on Mindus and Big, now on I see Meba Tombaina, and Digi and Chatanski Womares, Chatan Jumbar, Timabana, and Shalia, Rashel and Nubiki. Dunga Java Chima, Timachaban, Leanga Basak Mares, don't die in this world.
The meaning of these two verses, in terms of how we relate it to our meditation, is we take the object of the self, which appears to us as existing by way of its own essence, its own defining characteristics, to exist truly, and we seek it out. Does it exist in the way that it appears? Because we recognize through observation that the self appears in this way, and consciousness grasps at it as existing this way. We have a confidence that there is a self-existent self, a truly existent self, that has needs that also truly exist and need to be fulfilled for the sake of the self. There is a self too that needs to be protected from harm, protected from potential enemies. And because of grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears, attachment arises, wanting things to fulfill needs of the self, wanting to protect the self. Anger arises to repel unwanted situations and people away. And from this follows harsh speech and perhaps acts of physical harm towards others. In this way, from starting with grasping at the self as existing truly, non-virtue is accumulated. We continue to suffer in the realms of samsara, continue to circle in cyclic existence, trapped and bound by this consciousness of ignorance. Then when we investigate, is this consciousness that grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears, is this an ignorance, or is it actually concordant consciousness? And we come to investigate and see that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. We'll recognize that the self does not exist by way of its own nature. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And not grasping at a self, that a truly existent self, no attachment for that self, no attachment to fulfill the needs of that self or to protect, or anger to protect that self will arise. And in this way, we'll weaken and eventually sever all afflicted minds.
Dine zada nga zugi nga sedi nga sedi yore chida yobare. Chizada yobadi ko nga khoro yobare. Ine da nga zuli nga di nga zulo le pa nang du ka kadis nang du sene ka la ye ma de ha lue sha ba la ma de rang ngwe ni du ba nang go res. Chizandi di na wa na shin du mi du se de nga khoro ge rang shin ji kan de shin ba de nga zo ha go res. Chiza lo le na wa na shin ji Kalama Rangoni Juba Nawa Nashindi, Nagi Rashin Re Mare, said Nagi Rashindi, Lola Nawa Nashi Reve Mares. Lola Nawa Nashindi, Nagi Rashindi, Lola Nawa Nashi Yobaina, 강라에 마되바 뢰파 샤발라 마되바 그런 원이 줍줍해지 수강라에 마되바 그런 라 셴레 마되바 라 말레바 그런 원이 줍어지 요되고 그래 지단디 요고 그래서 네 그런 게 라신 된데 여봐이네 지단도 지네 제바지 되니기 파지 제바지 뒤갑라 나세도 제바지나 되니 나와 나신 자기는 매바레스 미엄바레스 지단디 매바디 나 그런 라신 되가서 강라에 마되 랑원이 마주바디 나 그런 게 라신이 돼 라신 된데 샤되어레스 지단 안도 낭뒤 그런 라신 딜레 도초지 나도 그러 나 그런 라신 가르선 강라에 마되 봐 뢰파 샤발라 마되 봐 랑원이 두바디 매바지래 이내 로라 나 유도 강라에 마데 랑원이 두바디 나 도초 나 그래 지단디 도초 나 지단 되니기 제바체제 나 그런 라신기디 강라마도 랑문이 마주베게 주베 동와디 나의 라신들이 디 라신 등아도 라신디 또 고야 돼 하고 고야 돼 라신 등외니서 하고 고야 돼 계시 무인에서 하 먹어 봐나 나와 나신 두선바 삼제 진바이나 가지고 노트 심부 차고 그래서 제가 무인에서도 하고 봐나 디 노트도 용 말해서 그러다
The self does exist, but it does not exist in the way that it appears. The first step in this meditation is a crucial step, and that is to recognize how the self appears. Because to be able to say the self does not exist in the way that it appears, one has to recognize how it appears, in order to be able to say that it does not exist in this way. So the way that all phenomena, in this case we're talking about the self, appear to our mind as existing independently, as if it is not influenced by anything else at all. It is independent of anything, of everything. For example, it's independent of causes. Doesn't require causes. It's independent of imputation by mind. It doesn't require imputation by mind. Another way to express it is the self, like all phenomena, appear to consciousness as if it exists by way of its own nature. A self, some nature to the self, this defining characteristic or essence to the self. And it's that it should be findable. This is how it appears. It's something to our self that makes me. That's how we appear. It's when this becomes vividly clear to us, this self-existence of the self, it's as if there's something so solid that one could almost reach out and touch it. So this would be something that doesn't, if it existed in this way, it wouldn't require imputation. It has its own nature, its own defining characteristic by which it exists, and therefore would not require imputation by mind or causes. It is self-existent, doesn't require causes. It has its own defining characteristic or nature, doesn't require causes such as imputation. So this is how the self appears. And this is important. It's a crucial first step to gain vivid clarity on how the self appears, because without recognizing this for ourselves, one can't come to recognize that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears, and therefore cannot recognize that consciousness that grasps at it as existing in the way that it appears as being a wrong consciousness.
다 강라에 마트여봐 되니게 랑문이 주바도 주네 매비게 랑문이 주베 동바디다 네 라신 당 돈담데 바세 책으로 돈담데 바스 나코라 라신 되니게 템버 강라에 랑문이 주베 동바세 동사 차려 뭐 라신디 디 나게 네 라신 돈담데 바세 책으로 와다 난 나디 요 말베스는 요래시래 아니 간스 요래시네 풍보라 때네 팔로에 따바쯤 요래스 풍보라 때네 풍봉아 보강로지라 때네 팔로에 따바쯤 요래스 하지 제자디 고 예바디다 풍보라 때네 뢰파 따바쯤 요바디 군습도 여봐 군습된 바세 최고래 대디 군습된 바세 제가 나 그런 게 라신라 뭐 라신 dondan 바 다 군습된 바 디텐도 나이 텐도 뭐 dondan 바 지다 군습된 바 이용거래 지된 바 이용거래 해서 디송거래
One investigates, having come to recognize how the self appears, one investigates and comes to realize that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. Here, one realizes the ultimate truth, emptiness. One realizes that the self does not exist by way of its own nature, characteristics, or essence. It is not self-existent. Being empty of this, the next, recognizing that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears, the final step in the meditation then is that the self, though, whilst empty of existing in the way that it appears, it does still exist, but how? Merely, or only, or just as an imputation by mind onto any of the aggregates, whether the body or the mental aggregates. So the self exists, but not in the way that it appears, as truly existent, but it exists only as an imputation by mind onto any of the aggregates. And this way that the self does exist is the conventional truth, the conventional way that the self exists, the conventionally existent self. So what is the conventionally existent self again then? The self exists but merely as an imputation by mind onto the basis, which is the aggregates. This is how the self conventionally exists, or this is the conventionally existent self.
Dine zada nga se di nga zu phumbo nga po sugi phumbo nga po se de sugi phumbo na choyi phumbo du shi phumbo du ji ben number shi phumbo nga po chi le ya pa lue pa ta ba zam chi ma do nga di number shi phumbo nga po de rebe se ne ma re ne sugi phumbo de nga rebe se ne nga ma re choyi phumbo de nga rebe se ne nga ma re dine du shi phumbo de nga rebe de ya ma re number shi phumbo de nga rebe se nga re phumbo nga po re ne nga gi ngo nga ma re nga khoron 부모가 버리려는 나이 랍나 나 강사 나 차로로 수직결에 안에 소수대양 아래 소화대양 아래 강사래 안에 두시대양 강사래 두시 부모대양 남바리 부모대양 강사래 랍나 강사 나 차로로 제가 먼저 강사 찍마도 요망 차하셔 봐 제가 부모가 버리려는 나 레베스는 나 말해지 이내 나디 쿠파 답이게 답이 시르르 방아세 딱서게 답이 시디 풍봉가 보강로질래 다고를 마도 풍봉가 보고로 가사 말해서.
Again then, the self being empty of existing in the way that appears, empty of true existence, is the ultimate truth in relation to the self, the realization of emptiness. But the self does exist conventionally. The conventionally existent self is as a mere imputation by mind onto the aggregates. Here it's good to remind ourselves and do this in meditation to recognize, so as not to make an error, that whilst the self it conventionally exists as a mere imputation onto the aggregates, a mere imputation by mind onto the aggregates, that does not mean that the self is any or the collection of the aggregates. If the self were, for example, the body aggregate or the physical aggregate, then this body would be the illustration of the self. But it cannot be, it changes momentarily, for example. Also, we couldn't say the feeling aggregate is the self. Whilst the self is imputed by mind onto the feeling aggregate, for example, I feel happy, if the self were the feeling aggregate, that feeling could never change, because the self appears to us as being unchanging. So the self, whilst imputed onto the aggregates, it is not the aggregates, or the aggregates are not the self. The self is merely imputed onto them.
Lupa, nga said, Tagore, nga said Tagores. Caris Tagors and Suki Pumpo, down the Caris Tagors and Suki Pumpo, the Kuyo Manashi, Padu, you call nga de Sada. The combat judges who put the Kuyo down to the Kabla, nga to you, said Dig of some of the Suki Pumpo, Lupa, nga the Suki Pumpo, Tago, nga to you, Sada. Then I did you, nga to you. They think I'm to legality, nga legally, Dig of some of Julia, nga said the Kawaltagos, Lupa, Suki Pumpo, the Tati Tagore. Diane Gabriel Yang and Zugim, so I did on lunch, so I did what kid, on I give to Sada. So I do much kid, on I give me to Sada. And so I done him cheese laid, or the thing I'll tell you to Sabi. Dig of so much not said the Caril, so you pump Palu Tagore. Jazada, young Nazuki, oh, the dig. Nga and the supporting Bui said the castle, Nga me said that, but Nga me, Yahap did I did me, said you, down to Dushi delpa, did Dushilpa, Nga said Tagores, Dushilpa Tagores. Is that the name that Dang together? Diane Chignat Yama, Yore, Lonyama Chichibi, Dangad Margin, Dushi to Guis, the dinner, the Tartu Zording on Zugi. Dashi, Chashu Dingan Zodi, numbership, what Chako, numbership. Chazan Gewanga Mati, Denema, Gewa Chiman Mardoyan, Tabata Tamjiki or San Yokovalia Dugre said, the numbership Pumbol Pata Gore. Chazan Dine Zanga to Pumbongal Pa, Gabriel Gablea, Pumonga Control Pat, Lepa, Tadanros, Dineres.
So the conventionally existent self is merely an imputation by mind onto the aggregates. Illustration then onto the physical aggregate. I'm sitting, I'm walking, I'm standing. So here, onto the body, the self is being imputed. Similarly, I am in a good mood. I'm not in such a good mood, or I'm really relaxed. Here it's the feeling aggregate onto which the self is being imputed by mind. I am a human being. I am an Australian. Here we have the self imputed by mind onto the discrimination aggregate. And what is perhaps most fundamental is where the self is imputed onto primary consciousness. For example, when we think of ourselves in the past, when we were younger, or last year, we think of the self that we spiritually developing and will eventually achieve liberation from suffering and full enlightenment. That self is imputed by mind onto consciousness, onto primary consciousness. So these then are illustrations of the conventionally existent self that is imputed by mind onto the aggregates.
Zada dine zang zugi ba nga de yu sa da nga zhu yu se bi ka bla nga zu su bu pa le pa nga sa da jie nga de yu se chi pa su bu pa da ne an di ge so nga di su bu pa le pa da bi gu ne da ba zhe mi yue ba de ji zang nga di yang de bi ge jia wa ro jie jia wa ji ge lo ba ji zang nga da ba zhe yue ba de ji da dine da ba zhe mi yue ba ma chen ba ji an da ba na ji nga di ga yo re se de ne 풍부 야르스 파 심주지 제제네 제연데 갑라 나 되되요 세딩 하디 가와 되되 거기들이 락바들이 강바들이 고들이 아니 수부디 아니 거기들이 스푸두신 수부는 파 심주지 제연네 난 나디 예매 말해 제가 수부딜레 오딜레 로수 나 세딩 예매다 먼저 나 되되요 세네 나 저기 디니게 제베 되베 갑라야 나 되되요 라르바다 안겨 나 되되면 나 가라 나 되바데 거기들이 세 파심진 수부디 오레 로수 나 진예요 말해 매바래 제가 수부 오 그런 다하란 나세데 디가서 수부 오단 오점치레 오점이야 그래서 르파 따바점이 수부 오단 그래서 탐미디베게 나세지 르파 따바점 여바마도 제바제는 수부 오레 로수 나세데 로수지 어디래샤서 비제 예매바래.
Important in the reflection, so as not to make an error, not to be confused, that when we say that the self is merely imputed by mind onto the aggregates, it does not mean that the self can be found in the aggregates. So in your meditation, keep coming back to this. So if, for example, I'm sitting here. So we've heard then that the I is imputed onto the body, because we're referring to the body, to the self as sitting. I am sitting. So the self is imputed onto the body. And this would be the case for any activity that one is doing. But that does not mean that the self is the body. It also does not mean that the self can be found anywhere apart from the body, cannot be separated from the aggregates. But what we really need to be clear on is that when we say that the self is imputed by mind onto the body, it doesn't mean that if we search in the body, we will find the self there. It is only an imputation, only merely just an imputation onto the body. And that imputation in terms of activity can only be done onto our body. It can't be done onto something else. And the key point again is that does not mean, though, that the self can be found within the body. It's only an imputation onto the body.
Nga se pa tabi lol pa nga se tabi shi de lia sem se de kanish dasa ge ta nga se sem pa taba zim le lol pa sem number she bala taba zim ji re se de nga zu jim ju che je ta taba zim na number she bo khorong kan chi yo re se ya number she bo khorong kan du se sim chi de number she ba se de ya nga zu ge da shin chi be che na nye me de ji de jing ga da ji ba number she bo khorong na da shin chi be che na nga se tabi shi min dasa ge shi number she bo khorong ya ta kan chi lo la na na shin chi na yu de ka la rang mo de shi nga na ta ji ba le gang lai ma de khorong wen ni zhu de ge ji yue ba jin neng guo de ne de na shin chi jie ba qian na number she bo khorong ya nie me de ji zhen number she bo khorong wo gang lai ma rang mo de zhu be dong sang ji yin ba ji la yu na wo rang xin zhu be dong sang ji yin ba 이나야 고 유디 디단디레스 하고데 지 유리바 잠지 뭐 줍되게 차대로 와지다 유리바세 유리바 하고되게 하고되게 짐발라 뭐 라시 줍에 동배 동사지但今年 저기做的 셈的 파도 现在 삼다지 지 동반이 섬제바 지연도 셈 코로나 랑원의 줍에 강来 마도 랑원의 매바래 바로 바 따바 섬지 매도 매바래
As we seek the self within the aggregates, going through each one recognizing that the self cannot be found within the aggregates, we come to look within that of consciousness or primary consciousness, within the aggregate of consciousness. And this is primarily where how we do relate to the self, thinking about the self that has existed from life to life, and from when you're younger to growing up to now to thinking of our old age. We tend to relate most to the consciousness aggregate as being the self. But like with other aggregates, we need to search within the consciousness aggregate to find, is the self to be found anywhere within primary consciousness? And we'll come to recognize that within that basis of investigation, the basis of analysis of primary consciousness, the self cannot be found anywhere at all. The self cannot be found in primary consciousness at all. In fact, consciousness itself is empty of true existence, like all phenomena. The essence of consciousness is that it knows an object. But consciousness remains empty of true existence. And nowhere within consciousness can the self be found. Now, that being said, though, the self, though, is imputed onto the consciousness. But it is only merely imputed onto consciousness.
나 닝보디 가르 세네 당아들야 지게 노트지 로 노트 거지 Ni su di ma xing wei jian jin nga zo gang an chen no tu xue jian no tu di wong ge nga zo gang an le de ji ba wa dang be nga zo ji ka la sui ta ma xing wei ne ka la sui ne sui ta ma xing wei ne di ge xin ne ji xin bu me ba cha da de ne ga de yu ne nga zo ni su de ma xing ba ji an ni le ga che wei ne nga zo gang an che de yong guo lu ba zhen de ne za da nga zo ga de ngo se ne nga zo ngo ni su de la ya kun duan de be dian ba da kun zu dian ba ni se ju ya de ji za nga zo nga se di 나야 낭타치다 나의 로스 나도 그래서 나와 나신 될래 제바제나 나와 나신지 요 말했어. 제상가서 나와 나시 요래 삼제 진제 안 지려가 때문에 디 나와 나신 요래 선별로디 노트 차려야랬어. 제상로 노트지기 제소 장제가서 레가레바나 먼저 레가들 남로 야고 용 말했어. 제상 디기 제보 양서 강하면 불리고 그래제. 달로 무인에서 하고 위기 무인에서 하고 위기 로디기 디 로체마 디 제소 전에 레가레바나 디 돈타디 주고래 돈도 주고래지 된디 무인에서 하고 위 로디 체마르와 제선로 체마 디 제소 전에 아니 먼저 레가레네 레가 돈도 주고래스 디네 인자 나즈리아 다데 바동아서 가르고 노트쇼더스 나즈 뭐 무인니스디 나세디 하모거레스 나즈 나다 풍보다 최간에진데 디 무인니스도 하모거레스 디 무인니스디 대신아즈 미규 변의 취진비 와셰다 아니 델레 베자 샤바다 지바 무인니스 하모고 미규 취진비 와셰디 제수장의 제바나 망고 강아치거와 디나시 제자당아서 하고고에데 가르스는 아 중무인니스디 나와나신 메디가 랑응은 주변 동바데 디 동바데 하고 디도 그래서 디 하고 바이나 대가지고 데라 아니 랑아 요레선 갈라니 랑은 주변 요레선 물로디 용구 말했어 디 마요마나 안 델레베 차다기 말했어 차다니 리고 말했어 차다마 제바이나 가지고 랭안 바사야다 샬리아 뇌세치야디 용 말했어 디 매바자 하는 가지고 라신이가 레디기 줍투 그래야지 다디 donadi azo diringi shea dige donda nimbo de dishi gorda
Well, to summarize the essence of what we've looked at in the session is that the whole purpose of this topic that we're studying is to come to understand reality. In general, we can understand that when one acts in accordance with reality, things are likely to go a lot better. When one acts in a way that is contrary to reality, clearly we're going to encounter problems. Ultimate truth, conventional truth, it's through understanding these and meditating on them that we'll come to understand reality. So firstly, we need to recognize in terms of the self, how the self appears to us. And appears to us, just like all phenomena, appear to us in the same way, as being truly existent. Then we need to investigate to see if that appearance is in accordance with reality. Because it's not just that phenomena, such as the self, appear to us as being truly existent. That appearance on its own does no harm. But innately, we grasp at all phenomena, for example the self, as existing in the way they appear. We grasp at words that are said to us as being true, as objects that we see, that we taste, as being true, as our thoughts being true, truly existent, as existing in the way they appear. And because we grasp at everything as existing in the way that it appears, and that, as we've heard, is a wrong consciousness, we encounter problems. We accumulate non-virtue, and afflictions continuously arise. But when we investigate reality, we come to realize that the self and all phenomena, whilst appearing to us, or despite appearing to us to exist by way of their own nature, they do not. And that the consciousness that grasps at them as existing in the way that they appear is not in accordance with reality and therefore is a wrong consciousness. To the extent we realize this, then all that appears to us, every thought that we have, every object we perceive and all the thoughts about them, we'll recognize that that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear. And therefore, our grasping at them It's a wrong consciousness. Recognizing this will harm our grasping, will weaken our grasping. Realizing that words do not exist in the way they appear, that objects, physical objects, do not exist in the way they appear. What we are thinking about, these two are mistaken. They do not exist in the way they appear. When we recognize that something does not exist in the way that it appears to us, why grasp it as existing in this way? We will stop doing so. Our attachment to things as existing in the way they appear, such as the self, will be severed. And with the severing of this attachment, the severing of the grasping, the severing of the attachment, will mean we will not harm others. Why harm others? When to fulfill needs that do not exist in the way they appear, to protect a self that does not exist in the way they appear. So this is the purpose of this meditation, to come to understand reality, and thereby to act in accordance with the wisdom that is in harmony with reality. So thank you. We'll conclude there.